Do you remember the discourse around Once Upon a Time in Hollywood where some people thought it was unequivocally great and other people were mad that how dare Tarantino be so mean to actual historical murderers, which is a completely wild take to have and says so much more about their feelings on Tarantino than it does his movie. Others were mad that Sharon Tate got short shrift in the narrative, which was true on one level, but also ignored the fact that Tate's own sister praised the performance, and no one gets to say that he didn't represent her properly if the people who actually knew her said he did. Others were entirely justified in their anger that Tarantino turned the film's only Asian character, one of the most revered action stars in history, Bruce Lee, into a joke. One that the people who knew him did not feel accurately represented who or what he was. I remember delving into all of this and so much more during that time, and then seeing a tweet from Matt Neglia which read, "You think film Twitter is bad now? Just wait till Joker comes out," and that gif of Arthur Fleck laughing, because he and a bunch of other folks had already read the script, and they knew what was in store for the rest of us. And in the days and weeks following Joker's premiere at Venice, there were plenty of hints at what the controversies were going to be in the broader conversation, both from folks who had seen the movie and the people behind the movie. Director Todd Phillips, in particular, made headlines when he complained about how you can't be funny anymore because of the SJW cucks or whatever, which is probably the funniest thing he's said in years, because good golly, is that not even kind of true? But that's all part of the meta discourse around the film, and that has been really quite unnerving and problematic in its own right. My sometimes editor at the Daily Beast, Marlo Stern, wrote a great piece about this, how the media is failing in the way that it talks about Joker, and specifically this fear of violence on the part of newly inspired incels. Indeed, the first thing I noticed at my opening night IMAX screening was the pair of armed police officers hanging around the theater's entrance. There was plenty of violence in America this weekend, both actual and metaphorical, committed against people and society. There was always violence in America, and uniquely American violence at that. But you know what didn't cause that violence? A movie. Not even Joker. And yet people still lost their damn minds. But you know what? I'm not entirely sure I blame them. Hello, by the way, and welcome to the Week Air Review. You can call me a fake nihilist. And today, I'm talking about Joker. Joaquin Phoenix plays Arthur Fleck. He's a clown for hire, the type that spins signs outside of stores and dances for sick kids at hospitals. He has a condition and carries a card around to let people know. Because of either mental illness or traumatic brain injury, he is prone to fits of laughter at inappropriate times, particularly when he is uncomfortable. It's a defense mechanism of sorts that brings unwanted attention and is genuinely painful to watch as he claws at his throat trying to stop the laughter that just keeps coming. Fleck isn't funny, but he so desperately wants to be. He sits in on a comedian's set and looks around while everyone else is laughing. He takes notes. I thought he might even be copying punchlines the way he copies the physicalities of those he sees on television, but it turns out to be much more superficial than that. Observations. Sex is always funny. Hardy har har. He wants to copy the comedy affect and believes that the rest will just fall into place. But he doesn't really understand what funny is. And it's not just that he can't properly construct a joke. He legitimately doesn't know where the comedy is. When he's listening to the comedian, he laughs at the setup, but never the punchline, and he laughs alone and doesn't seem to understand it. When his neighbor Sophie shows some kind of humanity as the building elevator momentarily stops functioning, ultimately resulting in her becoming his stalker obsession, he chooses exactly the wrong part of her joke to emulate in isolation. He doesn't actively want to make people uncomfortable, but he doesn't know how not to. But Arthur's not just deluded. He is genuinely delusional, suffering from something like schizophrenia, which, let's be super clear, is not dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder, despite the way that it seems to have been repurposed for general use. And it is established very early on that not everything we see is real. As he and his mother watch Robert De Niro's nightly comedy show, he is suddenly there in the audience. He shouts, "I love you, Murray," and suddenly the show stops so that he can be brought down on stage. Him loudly declaring his affection for the host is not an annoyance, it is an act worthy of celebration. "I'd give it all up for a son like you," this imagined Murray says to Arthur, and then we're back in grungy reality. This is the hallmark of one of the film's key inspirations, Martin Scorsese's 1982 film The King of Comedy, which wove in and out of reality as its protagonist, played by De Niro back when that was really something to be excited about. I am excited to see The Irishman, but it's for the Scorsese-ness of it, not the De Niro-ness. Became obsessed with getting onto a similar talk show, and the question of what's real and what isn't hangs over every moment of Joker. And I have some feelings on that I'm going to get into after the main review is done, so you can skip ahead to the time code on the screen if you're just here for that. Joker, regardless of the reality of what it's depicting, is a fantasy. It is about a man who has been beaten and stepped on and lied to his entire life, taking control for the first time. This begins entirely by accident when an act of self-defense becomes the symbol of a resistance. The deaths of Wall Street types working for one Thomas Wayne, who called the residents of Gotham clowns, causes people to rise up, because fuck the rich for fucking everyone else. Every billionaire is a policy failure, don't you know? And so whatever gets done to these people is fine. That whole thing is distinctly not my problem with this movie. But it's interesting that the gross behavior exhibited by the bankers is specifically misogynistic. 3 drunk guys bothering a woman on the subway who just wants to read her book. Arthur gets uncomfortable and starts laughing, which gives the woman an out and then makes him the new target. But while we, the audience, are supposed to be horrified by the horrifying way that these men are acting, it's a lot less clear where Arthur fits into all of this. Much has been made of the incel-friendly nature of his character, that Arthur is alone and incapable of talking to any woman who isn't his mother or his government-appointed therapist, which is a thing I will get back to. But a critical part of being an incel, at least in the current context, is actively hating women, and that's not a part of his character. As previously mentioned, his stalking Sophie is a result of him radically misunderstanding the meaning of her speaking to him in the elevator. He doesn't necessarily see her as a person, and that is, of course, very bad. But there's no reason to believe that if she hadn't said anything to him that he would have pined for her or hated her or had any feelings about her whatsoever. Admittedly, the subplot's unclear resolution will color your perspective on that previous paragraph depending on what you think it means. But it is inarguable that Fleck's violence, that what drives him to take on the moniker of Joker, has nothing to do with women specifically. There will be thousands of people who see themselves entirely in Arthur Fleck, and many more will see pieces. Humans are complicated, and if you make any given person the protagonist of a story and give their psychology a fair shake, people will find some aspect of them to connect to. For the example that definitively proves the rule, look at Oliver Hirschspiegel's 2004 film Der Untergang, also known as Downfall. While it's mostly known for a particular ranting scene that spawned 10,000 memes, there's much more to this depiction of the last days of Hitler's life as his world collapsed around him. And it's hard to watch Bruno Ganz's performance of an absolute monster and not to sympathize with him, at least in moments. moments always followed immediately by feelings of revulsion at having felt that way. But that's just the humanity in you. And so you will feel for Arthur Fleck. When he does horrible things, you will understand why he did them. And maybe you'll even agree with the fact that he did them. Ideally, you would then feel bad about it once you took a step back, but the feeling will have been there. And that leads to the all-important question, what the discourse is really about. Just because we can make this movie and get immense talent in front of and behind the camera, should we? Does this story need to exist? Do we need another movie about an angry white man who feels that society has left him behind? Do we as a society gain anything from the existence of this additional mirror being held up for us to stare at our collective failures? And we can argue till the cows come home on those, but here's the one that gets me. Did he have to be mentally ill? And did it have to be so integral to his character and the development of his persona? Arthur Fleck, unlike most Jokers, is not a psychopath. That is really important, and it changes everything. And here's something that's also important. Mentally ill people are far more likely to be the victims of violence than they are the perpetrators of it. You wouldn't know that from watching movies or really experiencing any part of pop culture, but it's true, and it's awful. And we actually do get that a little bit in the subway when those goons beat him up for laughing. He can't help himself, and he is punished for it. And he is generally treated as less than by people, in large part because of that illness. And his life is made hell because of mental illness. But as explicitly stated in the film, his decision to turn is also about that mental illness. And many of the actions taken by the mentally ill in this film are purely bad. And maybe you could sort of make the argument that it's still not demonizing the mentally ill as much as the society that doesn't care about them. Arthur was going to therapy and taking medication until the city cut funding for human services. Of course, the woman who was ostensibly his therapist clearly wasn't doing a great job, even when she could be there for him. But it was still something. People whine like a bunch of pathetic fucking children when you tell them that guns kill people, and they say, no, it's a mental health problem. Let me have my guns. I'm not going to shoot my wife, even though they probably are. And it's like, cool. So are you going to do anything about the mental health crisis? And then they changed the subject. Honestly, every single person who has ever invoked the Second Amendment in an argument is a worse person than Arthur Fleck. But even if that society-level justification exists in the background and is truly a problem and one that folks with power should be doing a whole lot more about, the reality is that the bulk of the film is making a clear statement that mentally ill people are dangerous. And that's not true. That is the dangerous thing. Joker is not problematic because of what its protagonist believes, but what it believes about its protagonist. 5.0 out of 10. So let's talk about that ending. Okay, first, thank you to my patrons, my mom, Hamry and Marco, Kat Saracata, Benjamin Schiff, and Anthony Cole. Y'all are great. Thank you so much. The ending of the Joker is not great. Okay, so the big riot happens, spurred on by Fleck as Joker's live murder of Murray on the Man's Talk Show, after saying the line that will inevitably become this film's legacy. What do you get when you cross a mentally ill loner with the society that abandoned him? Exactly what you deserve. I mean, if that line isn't in some horrible manifesto in the next year, I will be genuinely shocked. But I digress. He is held up by the rioters, who revere him for what he has done. He is not their leader, but he is known to be important to them nonetheless. He finally gets to be that person he wanted to be, the one deserving of applause, who matters to people. He's brought some form of happiness into the world. Boom. Arthur Fleck is in custody. Probably at Arkham. Hell, there are many moments that feel fake, each of which seems like the start of something off. Similar to how it's obvious that Sophie is imagined after that first interaction. She says, "Did you follow me?" and then is super cool with it. Like, absolutely not. The world is too grounded for that. So everything that seems unrealistic probably is. Hell, the fact that he successfully killed those 3 bankers, not missing a single shot, effectively the first time he used a gun, that doesn't seem right. The weird moment where he was suddenly in a costume at the Chaplin screening, not a chance. The entire police car crash through his ascension to greatness, as if each of these things feels out of place. And the movie itself tells us that things that feel out of place aren't real. And since one of those is the narrative's inciting incident, and many of the others build into each other narratively, it must be that this entire thing is a house of goddamn cards. And you just have to wonder why. If none of this is real, hell, even if like 75% of it is real, what was the gosh damn point of it all? Is it just to pay homage to movies of the 70s and 80s? Because that's a garbage reason. The movie needs to be more than a punchline. Because whether it's real or not, Arthur ends up victorious, having just murdered the therapist at the very least. The thing that he laughs at that she wouldn't get, the birth of Batman, does feel like a joke played on the audience, because we know what that moment was, but it doesn't even matter, because this is a one-off. We saw an origin of the origin, a world where the Joker made the Batman. And yet it doesn't fucking matter, because nothing fucking matters. Ugh. I hope to see you next week.